Here's the real reason nobody called the cops on Tony Soprano. Fear beats civic duty every single time. There is perennial outrage over one of the earliest scenes in The Sopranos. Tony and Christopher run down a man in broad daylight, in a corporate parking lot, in front of what appears to be a small audience of Office Park onlookers. Inevitably, the same question surfaces. Why weren't they arrested? As if the pilot episode's true crime had been committed not against the victim, but against contemporary expectations of omnipresent HD surveillance and instant accountability. The complaint assumes a world full of dutiful citizens eager to file police reports, flawless CCTV systems eager to record them, and police departments eager to spring into efficient action. How charming. Unfortunately, the late 1990s were not one endlessly rolling Ring doorbell camera. What surveillance existed was grainy, static, often decorative, and usually pointed at the wrong wall. If the Pentagon and the Columbine cafeteria could only muster footage resembling abstract art, an insurance company's lawn was not going to outperform them. And then there's the matter of witnesses. The modern viewer envisions a Greek chorus of civic-minded bystanders racing to dial 911. Reality, particularly in New Jersey, was acquainted with a different archetype. The citizen who sees nothing, heard nothing, and miraculously becomes 43% blind the moment a man in a suit demands his money. No one volunteers to become the star witness in a mob-adjacent drama. Testifying against the local crew is not a path to heroism, but to sudden relocation, usually downward, into a river. The victim himself, an employee deep enough in gambling debt that he was already spreading rumors questioning Tony's masculinity, was hardly poised to cooperate with law enforcement. The choice between filing charges and continuing to breathe is, for some, surprisingly straightforward. Even the police could predict the outcome of that conversation. No complaint, no case, no work to be done. Paperwork that never existed is remarkably easy to misplace. The insistence that someone surely would have reported the incident presupposes a public deeply invested in acts of civic virtue. Yet countless anecdotes, from Stepney pubs to Glasgow street corners, describe far worse violence committed in front of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of onlookers, all of whom instantly developed the same remarkable medical condition: total, unified amnesia. Neighborhoods with entrenched criminal cultures didn't view violence as an anomaly. They viewed it as a scheduling inconvenience. People minded their business because the alternative invited consequences. This is not even solely a question of fear. It is also a question of plausibility. Law enforcement solves barely half of violent crimes today, in our age of endless data and cameras, and the rate was no better in 1999. And that figure only applies to reported crimes. Many never enter the system at all. The idea that police departments drowning in unsolved assaults would launch a full-scale investigation into what amounted to a debt collection beating, one with an uncooperative victim and no identifying information beyond two white males in a car, is optimistic to the point of comedy. But even this misses the more obvious explanation. The scene was in the pilot. The tone was exaggerated, the show still calibrating itself, and the writers had not yet adopted the later, more disciplined realism. Early episodes asked viewers to accept not just an impulsive parking lot beatdown, but Carmela cheerfully unboxing an AK-47 in the kitchen. Later seasons corrected these flourishes, but the pilot remains a relic from a time when David Chase was still convincing HBO that the show would mix its vegetables with dessert. Of course, the more generous reading is that within the show's world, Tony had already established a reputation formidable enough to discourage witnesses, victims, and police alike. He had local politicians on retainer, cops whose memory conveniently faltered, and a community well aware of the consequences of cooperation. The FBI's attention in the first season was focused on bigger fish, and Tony was not yet the official boss. He could indulge a reckless impulse to reassert his authority in public because he believed the risk manageable. Yet beneath every practical explanation lies the simplest one of all. The scene needed to happen, so the story could happen. Watching Tony Soprano serve life without parole after the pilot episode would not have made for compelling television. Suspension of disbelief is not merely a courtesy. It is a requirement of narrative fiction. Yes, the scene is exaggerated. Yes, Tony would never make such a public spectacle later in the series. But expecting airtight procedural realism from a pilot whose job was to grab attention is an oddly puritanical standard for a show that made its name by treating mob violence not as neat moral arithmetic, but as chaotic human behavior. In the end, the outrage over the lack of immediate arrests reveals less about the show and more about the modern viewer. Someone raised in a world of constant observation, incapable of imagining a recent past where people minded their own business, cameras didn't watch every move, and authorities didn't miraculously appear on cue. The world of The Sopranos mirrors the world that actually existed, not the sanitized surveillance state people now retroactively project onto the 90s. Witnesses stay silent. Victims refuse to cooperate. Cops look the other way. Crimes go unsolved, and television pilots occasionally indulge in flamboyant absurdity. The mystery is not why Tony got away with it. The mystery is why anyone finds that unbelievable. Tony got away with it. You won't. Unless you subscribe.